That's all it was, just a letter. I got it right here. Can you see it up there?
Yeah.
It says, this will confirm that your letter was received. I received the contents, reviewed the contents of your letter. Note that there are no articulated complaints of misconduct or complaints of service with respect to any members of the Edmonton Police Service or in relation to the policies and procedures of the Edmonton Police Service. As such, this matter has been classified as information only and is now concluded. Well, gee, that's perfect, because they've accepted what I told them as the truth, and they're not disputing one word of it, and they put it in writing.
There's no zip code up there either, eh?
Of course not. Of course not. I tell them, if you want to be guilty of mail fraud, unless you want to be guilty of mail fraud, you won't send it to a zip code. So, and it's like, you notice on my letter that's on the desk, okay, from the U.S. Solicitor General. No zip code. Okay? And it's Glenn Winningham, House of Fern, is who I told them I was, and they addressed it to Glenn Winningham, House of Fern. But notice it's Dear Mr. Winningham. And the important thing there is that they know that the family name is never mentioned at common law. Okay? They know that. So they're not mentioning it. They know. They know I'm the king. And that's what we're talking about there. This is a digital version of that letter.
Excuse me, but doesn't Mr., Mrs. refer to the person?
You know, it might, but they're still acknowledging that it's common law. Okay, I'm a national. Okay, and so they know they don't have any authority. There's actually even in the Immigration Act, in Title 8, that's not positive law, it talks about American nationals in there, but it says like next to nothing in there about them. All it just says basically is that they exist, which is, you know, what I am as an American national, okay, or a Canadian national, okay. They know that we exist, but they have no authority over us at all. Yes.
Were you referring to Mr. As reference to a military application?
Well, I just read that any reference to Mr., Ms., Miss,
legal fiction.
Mrs. is the legal fiction.
It may be. It may be.
Not everybody that writes
But-
letters knows that.
But they're still acknowledging that it's common law, because they're not saying Mr. Fern.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's Mr. Winningham. So, anyways, and if you go through, see, if you look at the letter, I tell them in there. I'll read you the paragraph in here. This one's going to go to the the chief of the Toronto City Police. Here we go. It says, you, William Bear, Chief, Toronto City Police, et al. Okay, et al. Means and others. Are noticed that pursuant to Title 18 United States Code Section 1342, my proper name is Glenn Winningham, House of Fern, and my proper address is, with a postal address of non-domestic mail. Now there's a couple things here. Postal, okay? Mail is, there's a lot of words you have to understand are used in martial law, okay? Mail is one of them, okay? Traffic is another one. Remember, in Alberta it's called the Traffic Safety Act. Okay, those are all martial law terms. Anyways, you got to understand where these words are. Okay, there's a lot of words that are used in martial law. Anyways, so I tell them it's a postal address. Okay, a non-domestic mail is, if you go into the domestic mail manual, they talk about domestic mail, as with the zip code and all that, right? So I tell them it's non-domestic. Okay, so it's still in the United States of America, but it's not domestic as far as the United States is concerned. Because domestic as far as the United States is concerned is in the District of Columbia. Anyways, I list here my address as Care House 6340 Lakeworth Boulevard, number 437, Fort Worth, Texas, zip code exempt, and unless you want to be guilty of mail fraud, it shall be shown exactly like it. Now, Title 18 United States Code Section 1342 talks about fictitious mailing addresses. And it's a felony to send a letter to a fictitious mailing address. and a zip code is clearly a fictitious mailing address, and it's a felony to send an address, to send mail to someone that, and you're not using their proper name. So I tell them what my proper name is and my proper address. It talks about it in there. And so I use the proper name and proper address specifically to put them in that position. And you notice they put everything down there exactly like I had it.
In Canada, it's the Canada Letter Mail Regulations, 11B, states that you don't have to use a postal code if you use a postage stamp.
Really?
Yeah, if you use any of those metered mails, that's all commercial. You must have a postal code. If it's a licked-on postage stamp, don't need a postal code. I got a letter with me confirming for the Minister of Canada Post, you don't need to use a postal code.
Perfect. Okay, so I've had negative responses too. And again, do you know who you are? Are you going to let some bureaucrat make legal determinations for you and represent you? I don't care if he's a judge. I don't care who he is. He's my servant, and he's damn well going to honor his oath of office, or I'm going to file a criminal complaint against him. I file criminal complaints against judges or anybody. I'm an equal opportunity criminal complainer. And, I had judges. I filed a lawsuit against the IRS, and the judge was making all these legal determinations for me, and I told him in the lawsuit that he didn't have any right to do that. So I filed a criminal complaint, and I filed it into the lawsuit, and he closed the case. Eh? So then I went to the Court of Appeals, and then I went to the Supreme Court, and when I got to the Supreme Court, they waived their right to respond. And I don't know if you understand anything about the law, but when you're in a lawsuit and you make an allegation and they don't dispute it, then they've admitted it as the truth. And so when I went to the Supreme Court, I just dumped on them, and I just brought up all sorts of stuff. And the U.S. Department of so-called Justice, which is what I called them in the case, by the way, the U.S. Department of so-called Justice. Anyways, the U.S. Department of so-called Justice waived their right to respond in the case. So that's admitting everything. They admitted it all. And I told them, I said, first of all, I said, all through these lower courts, I demanded to see the contract. Where's the contract? They never produced the contract. And so I said, so there is no contract. They're nothing but a bunch of thieves. And they're perjuring their oath of office, and they're engaging in a criminal racketeering enterprise. And they waived their right to respond, so it's all the truth. Anyways, so what happened is the Pennsylvania Attorney General sent a letter making all sorts of legal determinations and presumptions and said they would enforce their law. So I filed a criminal complaint, sent it to the Chief Judge of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. At a minimum, I bet you that Attorney General never runs for office again, and they might ease him out of there. The Ohio Public Safety Commissioner sent me a letter making all sorts of legal determinations and presumptions. I filed a criminal complaint, sent it to the Ohio Attorney General, the Chief Judge of the Ohio Supreme Court, and the State Bar. And I'll bet you that he doesn't finish his term. You know, I have no idea. If I was living over there, I was living in New York at the time, so there's the potential I might, you know, have to travel through there. And if I was living over there, I'd follow up on it, but I'm not anywhere near there, and I don't plan on going over there. So I've just let it go. But it's amazing how when you start doing this stuff, if you do it right, they'll take care of it for you. I started doing this when I was going through a foreclosure in Arizona. Again, I was learning, I was listening to Rice McLeod's tape, and it was really starting to come together for me. And so what I did was I paid off my house with a promissory note. Well, needless to say, the bankster thieves stole it. And so what happened is they were selling my house at an auction. So I went to the auction and I arrested the auctioneer. And you know, I witnessed a felony. It's in the United States, if you witness a felony, and it's a felony to violate your rights under the color of law, okay? Which is exactly what they're doing. And so the auctioneer criminally converted my name and my address and my citizenship, and so I arrested her. And so the cops came, and they started building a case against me for disturbing the peace. And so I saw that happening, so I started building a case against the cops, and the judge, and the prosecutor, and the attorney, and all those guys. Anyways, I sent notice and demands to the police officers, to the chief of police, the town attorney, to the judge, and the town of Florence sent their straw man a summons, okay? Remember, my name in all block capital letters is not me, okay? I've been to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I sued the IRS because the IRS was stealing my money. I took them to the Supreme Court, and I put an affidavit in the Supreme Court, and it said, I do not have a Social Security number. I have never had a Social Security number. No problem, because I don't have one. It's a straw man, it's a corporation, it's a separate entity. So, do I have a driver's license? No. Does anybody here have a driver's license? Well, I don't know about you, but I don't have one. Now, my straw man has one, but I don't. And so, in my letters I sent to the police, I tell them, I don't have a driver's license. And there's no such thing as a driver's license under Texas law. And I just, like, build a case. I put them in a position where I'm going to have them for perjury of oath if they try and do anything. Anyways, so I attached the summons and the notice and demands that I had previously sent to an affidavit of criminal complaint and recorded it and then sent them a copy. And then I sent notice and demands to the Pinal County Sheriff, Maricopa County Sheriff, the Casa Grande Chief of Police, the Arizona Attorney General, the Chief Judge of the Supreme Court of Arizona, and the Phoenix Chief of Police. And what I did was, that was afterwards. Before I did that, I sent a notice and demand to the Chief Judge of the Supreme Court and the Attorney General, and I said basically that you have a bunch of criminals that are operating a criminal racketeering enterprise in Florence, which is the town where I arrested the auctioneer, right? Anyways, I said you have a bunch of criminals that are operating this criminal racketeering enterprise, and I demand that you regulate your subordinates and arrest these criminals. And of course they never did anything. So then I went and sent notice and demands, because now I was worried about, because I knew they were having a trial and they would probably issue a warrant. And so I travel in Casa Grande. I was living in Casa Grande at the time, and I travel, you know, between Casa Grande, which is about 50 miles south of Phoenix, and so I travel into Phoenix every week. I was working at U.S. Airways, and so I was worried about something happening, you know, coming to get me or something. And so I sent notice and demands to the Maricopa County Sheriff, the Phoenix Chief of Police, you know, everybody that might potentially want to come and arrest their straw man, right? So what happened is one day I come in from work. It was on a Friday before a long weekend, and my buddies at work told me there was some big guy here looking for you. The interesting thing is that the police wouldn't have anything to do with it. I had sent them notices, I accepted their oath of office, and I put them in a position where I had them for perjury of oath. They wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. It's the only person that they could get to come and get me was a bounty hunter. Right. And so what happened is, it was on a Friday, right? And the reason they come on a Friday is because the International Monetary Fund pays them $70,000 to keep you in jail for 3 days. And so it's a long weekend, Friday before a long weekend. And if you don't understand the law, then you're going to stay in jail. You're not going to demand a judge. If I was in jail, I'd say, I don't care if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, I want you to get his butt out of bed. I want him here now. Because you have that right. And get his butt out of bed. And I'd read him the Riot Act. But anyways, so they want to keep you in jail for 3 days so they can get their $70,000 from the International Monetary Fund. So anyways, it was Friday afternoon. I decided to take a day off, or leave early that day. It was a long weekend, and I was driving out of the parking lot, and I passed this guy with the yellow van. He was